Hello guys, this is part 2 of the Beatles series. This video will be talking about Pete Best. Now, on the internet, Pete Best is famous as the drummer the Beatles kicked out. Which it really wasn't the Beatles, it was Brian Epstein, but the Beatles didn't want him in the band anymore anyway because he couldn't keep up with them. But the weird thing is that you have what I like to call the Pete Best Defense Brigade. These guys are on every single Beatles video on YouTube, on the internet, defending Pete Best, claiming Ringo Starr sucks, when in reality, Ringo was a much better fucking drummer. It's the truth. And if you don't believe me, listen to the recordings. They're all over the internet. They're all over YouTube. Pete Best sucked ass as a drummer. And I'll even describe how he sucked. You gotta realize that when Pete Best was in the band, the Beatles had to play fast, because Pete Best would often, on a fast song, would play very, very fast. So the Beatles would they would have to play very, very fast. On a mid-tempo song, the Beatles had to play just as fast as they would play on a fast song. When it came to a slow tempo song, when Pete Best went, the Beatles still played fucking faster than he did. That is bad. That's how bad the dynamic was between them or him in the band. So yeah, he sucked. Not only that, but when he would often play the drums, rather than playing a variety of like hi-hats or cymbals and snares, he would just play one thing and just would stay on that one thing throughout the whole entire song, just going and go. And sometimes his playing would go in and out, in and out. And it was just, he was an amateur drummer. Never took a lesson, never committed to the instrument at all. And I can use a real-life parallel from the Beatles to compare. You gotta realize that when the Beatles took in Pete, they were kind of amateurs themselves. I mean, they could play a series of songs, they were decent musicians, but they hadn't gelled yet as a band. So they still were kind of raw, but at least they were just a tad bit better than Best. After coming back from Hamburg, they were well-seasoned musicians, almost like a jazz band in their synchronicity, in their ability to play together, in their ability to play off of each other, to hear each other, to just play as a working band. The only weak link in that band was Pete Best. After Hamburg, he was no better of a drummer than he was when he first auditioned for them. That is pretty fucking bad. The Beatles had already caught up. They were already a well-oiled band, could do almost anything they wanted to on a dime. This guy was just holding them back. And here's a real-life example. Stu Sutcliffe, who was their bass player at the time, was not even a seasoned musician himself. John actually bought him his first bass, taught him a couple of bass riffs, and he was there in Hamburg, and in the beginning he would screw up and he would have to turn his back to the audience. Well, he himself was even better than Pete Best before he left the band. When he left the band, he was a little bit proficient on bass. Proficient enough to play with any rock band at that time. He could have joined any rock band after leaving the Beatles, because he knew enough of the bass, he could play it well enough. That's, according to the Beatles, they said he actually was learning how to play the bass. He could play it better than most people think, because there's this whole myth that Stu Sutcliffe sucked as well. No. According to both Paul and John and George, Stu Sutcliffe was learning, and he was becoming a better musician from bits and ends, so that's a myth. But he left the band for Astrid Kircher, their photographer, so if your heart's not in it, your heart's not in it. But even Pete Best sucked worse than the guy who already picked up an instrument and learned in Hamburg along with the Beatles. That is how bad Pete Best was. He was just a shitty amateur drummer. And being from Liverpool, it compounded the fact, because there wasn't that many drummers in Liverpool, because drums were expensive, and the lessons they teach for the instrument were expensive as well. So with all of that, you have to realize that Pete was never right for the band to begin with. They only took him in because they were desperate, and they needed a drummer. Their former drummer before this was actually 3 times better than fucking Pete Best. His name was Tommy Moore. And when they auditioned him, he was actually in his mid-20s. Or no, actually I think he's 21 or 22, somewhere around there. But he could play a cha-cha rhythm, he could play a basic rock rhythm, and he was a badass drummer. But his problem was he did not like John Lennon's tongue. Basically, the way John Lennon would joke with people, he had a very biting wit, cruel sense of humor, and Tommy Moore didn't like that. And Tommy Moore was also in a relationship. He was about to get married, so it was either her or the band. So he quit the band, was working in a factory. And there's a famous story where the Beatles tracked down Tommy Moore at a factory that he'd worked at. He was on the tow motor when they said, hey, we need you for this gig. And John Lennon ended up making a very biting remark about Tommy Moore's hurt leg, and that kind of clinched the deal for him not to want to even perform with them again. So you got to realize, the Beatles did have a good drummer. They kind of, even though they were amateurs, they kind of had the inkling that this guy wasn't really up to snuff, but still, good fucking God, they were glad to get rid of him. And even after Hamburg, when they would tell him, when they would tell Pete, hey, you might have to take lessons, Pete refused. He actually refused to take lessons. That is how messed up this guy was. Now, there was also the personality aspect, because after Hamburg, the Beatles adopted a different look. They were still in their leather outfits. They had leather jackets, leather pants, leather boots, black leather boots. But they had the Beatle do, the famous mop top hairdo. Pete Best still had the 50s pompadour. He kind of stood out. And personality-wise, he stood out with the Beatles as well. You have to realize, the Beatles were the kind of guys who would just hang around each other. They would joke, make fun of each other. They got drunk together, did stupid shit. That's just the kind of guys that they were. Pete Best was the opposite of that. He was a loner. He was often moody and sullen. And after every gig, he would either go back to his house or go back to the hotel or whatever. He would leave. So you also have that aspect to it as well. He did not like to hang out with the Beatles. He was a loner. There was no chemistry there. And for the Pete Best Defense Brigade, you guys need to chill. Ringo was a way better drummer than Pete Best ever could be. And the fact that Pete Best could not even commit to even learning his instrument properly should show you that. Especially when Ringo Starr, who grew up in the slums, he basically grew up in the Dingle in Liverpool, which is the slums. He had to scrounge up enough money to even get a drum kit and to pay for what lessons he could get. And still, he managed to be 100 times better than Pete Best ever could be on that damn instrument. Anyway, thank you. Hope you enjoyed this video. Stay fucking awesome.